What was the context of the statement? Where did this originate? This stand against on martial law, the candidacy of Bongbong Marcos or otherwise? What triggered this response from the Ateneo community?
Well, first of all, there was a direct challenge, no, from Senator Marcos. No? He was saying, I think it was in response to President Aquino. No? He was saying, if you wanted to look at the past, leave it to the historians and to the students of history. The past is past. He said that what I need to address are the needs of the present. So it was a direct challenge, no, to professors and educators, formators. And we directly responded to that. And we felt that there was a problem if you say past is past and there's no connection with the present. But there's also a broader context. Now, if you remember, the last several weeks we've been talking about EDSA, on the 30th anniversary of EDSA. We also were linking it with De La Costa's centenary. And then a couple of years ago, we were talking about the 40th anniversary of Father Arupe's Men and Women for Others. So there's a broader context also in the Ateneo that we wanted to commemorate this and say that there really is a link between the past and the present. And this is something that you cannot say that past is past, no? That there's something that needs to be addressed, no? Especially if there are distortions.
What should the younger people or this present generation know from that generation so that that response is connected? What is there something about martial law that we should know so that the judgment is not just of the present but also of the past?
Well, first of all, you have to look at the claim, no, that authoritarianism is good for development. Now, I think what Senator Marcos was saying was that it was a time of peace and progress. And he also said that I don't need to apologize, or at least he was saying, if I can apologize if there's something to apologize for. So in a way, I think that's problematic because first of all, there is an attraction sometimes, no, to authoritarianism because some people are, I guess, exasperated sometimes, no, with our politics, no, the limitations of our democratic system, no, that they say, for example, there have been no changes. So there is some kind of attraction again, no, to that kind of project, no, that the New Society project, that maybe what we need is a benevolent dictator. I mean, completely forgetting that we went through 14 years now of authoritarian rule. No? So that claim to sa ikauunlad ng bayan, disiplina ang kailangan, or democratic revolution from the center, I think that has to be addressed head on. No? That, for example, if you look at the record of authoritarianism in the Philippines, especially if you say that there has been corruption, even back to the Spanish times or even continues to the present, you have to be concerned, no, that if you have centralized power, all the more that will be a problem. And that's precisely what happened. No? So there's that one level that we have to address, no? The question of authoritarianism and its relationship with development, which really is something that continues to the present because it's not just the past. On the second level, you have to look at the claims of and the justification, no, for martial law in the Philippines and what they actually did. For example, no, I think this is part of the problem in some of the textbooks, no, in grade school, no, when they say, for example, that because of the problems of lack of peace and order and that there was a lot of dissatisfaction with our democratic system, Marcos entered the picture, as it were, to fight the left and the right to establish a new society, and therefore martial law was necessary. I think that has to be debunked. Because first of all, it was a power grab. I think people forget that, no? That Marcos' term was supposed to end 1973. And he could not extend, no, his term. There were efforts, for example, in the Constitutional Convention to shift to a parliamentary system so he could run, or Imelda could run. But those were blocked, no, in the Constitutional Convention. So at some point, his only recourse was to declare martial law to extend his term. So it was really meant to continue his power. So there's that element, I think, that needs to be addressed. And secondly, if indeed, no, there was some kind of katahimikan or peace and order resulting out of martial law, we also have to look at what were the consequences. No? What was the kapalit? No? Ano nangyari doon? And I think this is where you begin talking about the destruction of democracy, you know, the arrests. No? People talk about extrajudicial killings, 3,250, 70,000 imprisoned, no? 30,000 tortures. I mean, this is a real cost. No? In fact, I was pointing out, no, that to my students also that this is even more than the extrajudicial killings in Chile under a military government of Pinochet. No? Of course, it's less than Argentina, no? The desaparecido, but this is still a lot. No? So there are tremendous costs, no, in terms of human rights violations.
How much time does history really need, or political science need, to make judgment? Just to point out what Bongbong Marcos said, that diba, does history need that much time? Isn't 30, 40 years enough?
I think that's sufficient time. And remember that many people are still alive who actually experience this. No? So I think when you look at the signatories to the Ateneo statement, no? Both the faculty but also the alumni, no? Who have been signing also onto this, you really see that these are people who have first-hand experience of martial law. No? And therefore you cannot just say this past is past, no? Because they do have experience of this. But even those who do not have, now, in fact, part of the background to the statement is that the people who initiated this effort were really people young, 25 years, 20 years younger than I am, no? Which means these are people in their late 20s or their early 30s who maybe were very, very young during EDSA or maybe were not even born yet. But that means that they actually studied that time and could make a decision, no, about martial law. And I think the record is clear, no? Not just about destruction of democracy or human rights violations, but especially the economy. I remember that sometimes there's a claim that this was a time of progress or sometimes even golden age. Maybe it did not come from Marcos himself, but certainly his followers have picked up on that idea of progress and then used that to say that this is a golden age. But look at the record. Look at the record. Of course, we know that towards the end of the regime, it really collapsed. No? We defaulted on our debt. But even before that, no, you have to say, where was this growth coming from? I mean, look at the initial years of martial law. Well, there was a commodity boom. So certainly exports would go up, sugar, coconut. So that picked up initially until maybe 1974. But after that, with oil prices increasing and Arab countries having all of these excess dollars, which they put in the banks, this was the reason why you had a debt-driven growth. No? Nabaon tayo sa utang eh. From around 2 billion in the early 70s, $2 billion, umakyat sa $25 billion. And it would not be surprising why we would be very vulnerable. And then, of course, the question also of where was the money used? No? Bataan Nuclear Power Plant, $2.3 billion. We were paying for this until 2007. No? So it's not true that this is past, no? Because even when the economy collapsed in 1983-84, the drop in the income in 1983 to 85 was around 15%. We were not able to recover until 2003, 2004. So it took us 20 years. So is it surprising why we have been left behind, no, by other neighbors? We were growing through, but it took us 20 years just to go back to 1982 levels. So if talk about progress, I think it was a failure.
Why is it important for the Ateneo to be involved in this issue about martial law, Bongbong Marcos? Is it something that we're just doing because it's something about Bongbong Marcos, or do we need him to apologize for the sins of his parents?
No, this is not something personal. No? So this is not something that that he has to apologize for just because he is the son of Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos. So it is not that. No? The problem is his interpretation of that time. Because precisely, if you maintain that sort of view, no, that authoritarianism was after all good, and sometimes he even says that the EDSA revolution hindered what could have been a better type of growth for the Philippines, I think that's going to be dangerous. No? So first of all, you have some problem with regard to authoritarianism. And secondly, you also overlook the tremendous costs, no, which I think is very clearly in the record, no? Whether in terms of human rights violations or the economy, and then the cronyism. No? So some people say that Marcos initiated a revolution from the center. No? That's the claim of Marcos's book or his technocrats. But the problem there was that he did not really address the oligarchy problem. No? In general, he may have attacked some oligarchs, but he created new ones. And that's precisely the problem. When you have authoritarian rule and when you have a situation where there's always been that kind of elite relationship with business groups and the state, I mean, that can very well happen when you have centralization of power. We have someone who wrote on that period, no? Rick Manapat, wrote smart, some are smarter than others. No? And he showed the interlocking directorates, no? That the Marcos family had the connection with the businesses at that time. So, I mean, the cronyism problem was real. And therefore, that was a tremendous cost on the economy. And so, therefore, it's not a problem with regard to Bongbong Marcos having to apologize for his parents. The problem is that he doesn't acknowledge that this was a problematic period. And if you don't recognize that, that will be repeated. No? He doesn't have to declare martial law. He's saying he cannot declare martial law as vice president, of course. But if you maintain that sort of view, and if your followers maintain that sort of view, that's going to be dangerous. So it's not just about the past. It's about the present and the future.
Is this current initiative of Ateneo, the signatures that were acquired and the steamrolling of opinion, is it because Bongbong is leading in some of the surveys and there's a big possibility that he could win as vice president? Is that the reason why all this talk has suddenly resurfaced?
Well, honestly, maybe that was part of it. No, that what has happened is that there's a greater urgency, because of what's showing in the surveys. But I think it's not the only reason, because people have been trying to address this problem for some time, and it's not just Bongbong Marcos, no? Because you do hear from other candidates the point of view that authoritarianism might be good after all, no? If you just get the right dictator. But I think that's problematic. And the other thing, what is our historical experience with authoritarianism? Because you cannot just say we can be Singapore, we can be Korea. No? I mean, we do have particular paths to history, through history, and also particular experiences, no, with our institutions, no, with our elites, with our government. So you cannot make that claim, no, that just because you could have something different or a different leader, that you would have a different result. No, because we do have 14 years of experience under authoritarian rules.
Are we asking him to apologize for the sins of his parents?
No, but well, not that he is responsible, no, as the son, and therefore the sins of the parents are transferred to the children or the heirs. No, I think that's not the point of view. But certainly, the society still has to recognize the fact, no, that a lot of the ill-gotten wealth have not been recovered, that there is still a lot of these questions about human rights violations that have not been addressed. I mean, certainly, I think you as a society, as a leader, not as a son, but as a potential leader, you have to account for that. And therefore, I think it's part of his responsibility to the present to acknowledge that past. So it's not as if past is past, no? Parang sinabi niya, iwan na lang natin sa mga nag-aaral ng kasaysayan. Ang aking trabaho ngayon ay tugunan ang pangangailangan ng kasalukuyan. But you cannot separate the two. There's a link between the two. As I said, even the economy of the past has an effect on the present. The whole militarization experience, no, has transformed the nature of our politics. The destruction of democracy, I think we're still feeling today. So I think you cannot separate the past, no, from the present and the future, and we have to be very conscious of that.
Let's talk about the past and Ateneo's response during the martial law period, 72 to 86. Some say that the Ateneo was not as vocal, not as strong in its anti-martial law position at that time. Care to comment on that, or is that a fair assessment of the Ateneo during that period?
Well, first of all, it was a time of ferment, no? And certainly a time of activism. In fact, we can start with 1968, Down from the Hill, the manifesto and the guidon of some students. At that time, they were already saying that the Ateneo was not responsive, no, to the needs of the country, that Ateneo remained to be an elitist institution, and that we needed to do was to respond to the demands of the national situation. And so therefore, there was an effort to do that. Remember that this was also coming out of a situation where the church was coming out of Vatican II, no, trying to address the problems of faith and justice, no, the modern world. So there was a time when people were thinking about this. But obviously there was also a debate about how exactly do you confront the Marcos government, even before martial law. No? So there was division. And I think when martial law was declared, or even just before martial law, obviously there was some division, even among many Ateneans or even the Jesuits. So I think we have to We have to recognize that. No? And when martial law was declared, for many people, the only available alternative was joining, for example, the National Democratic Revolution or the Communist Party. And there were Ateneans who actually did that. No? Edgar Hobson, Billy Begg, Eman Lacaba, and others went underground and paid for that by their lives. No? So there were Ateneans like that. But I think there were also Ateneans who decided to continue the work of Philippinization above ground. And for them, the meaning of Philippinization was not just to change the administration from American Jesuits to Filipino Jesuits, but really to understand the situation of the poor. So this was a time also of immersion, immersion programs. This was a time when expanding Ateneo programs to mean also social development. So this was 1973 was the Men and Women for Others Trust. No? This was also the time of the General Congregation, where the notion of faith and justice came in. So a lot of the organizations that eventually got into the anti-dictatorship struggle, especially in the 80s, were formed in the 1970s. Of course, they could not immediately confront the regime openly and politically because they were working above ground. But at the same time, the organizations were being formed. And I think it's not fair to the administration, Father Joe Cruz or Father Nebres in the School of Arts and Sciences, to say that they were pro-Marcos because this was happening, and this was continuous social formation work that was happening, and therefore I think this was the basis for the shift from social involvement to political involvement, especially after the Aquino assassination. And I think this is very important in building the nonviolent alternative, which crystallized in EDSA in 1986. So it did not emerge overnight. So it was not just 4 days of EDSA. This was a long process dating back to the late 1960s, but even through the 70s, when we were organizing, we were also forming student leaders, and eventually challenged them to get involved politically, to confront the Marcos government directly. Of course, that was provided by the democratic space out of the Aquino assassination. I think that was very important. I think it catalyzed a lot of the pent-up emotions and the need to get involved, and which was happening. And I think the alternative of active nonviolence evolved at that time.
Ateneo responds in different ways, different during martial law. Were there differences because there is no perfect presidency? The accusation against Ateneo is that it was not as vocal during the pitfalls and the shortcomings of the Cory administration or of this administration of President Aquino. Is that a fair evaluation of Ateneo, that it was not as vocal compared to the Marcos era or the Joseph Estrada and EDSA too?
Well, I think it's not also fair, because I think many of us recognize that EDSA was a genuine victory. It was a genuine popular achievement against dictatorship. So that's why I think our statement is also saying that we have to recognize that EDSA was something that was valuable, and therefore there was something really true about the victory over dictatorship. But I think we also know how imperfect even the vision of EDSA was, and there were also certain limitations the moment many of the democratic institutions were restored, which included, I think, restoration of some elite. So we recognize its limitations in terms of inclusiveness politically. We still have a political system which in many ways favors the elite. Of course, we do have a social and economic system in which there's still a lot of poverty and inequality. And I think we have challenged both the Aquino presidencies, Cory Aquino and Noynoy Aquino, with regard to that. So that's why I think we've been calling for greater inclusiveness, both politically and also socio-economically. So I think it's not fair to say that we have been pro-government in that sense, because we have challenged the government. Although it's true that I think whenever the government is threatened, especially by extremist forces, I think this was very true during the Cory Aquino years, the series of coup attempts that happened in the late 1980s, was something that was very important to us because we challenged that too. We formed the Kilusan Laban sa Coup d'etat because we believed that the victory over dictatorship was genuine, and therefore we had to protect the Aquino government at that time. But at the same time, still continuing the challenge that it has to address problems of development and also of inequality and inclusiveness. So I think the same thing, no, with Pinoy. I think we were also coming from a situation where we felt there was an abuse of power under the previous administration. So in a sense, there was also some support for efforts at greater transparency or good governance. But I think we recognize too that despite the growth, there's some need also to address inclusiveness together with transparency and good governance. So I think we've been pushing the government also to be accountable, but also making ourselves accountable, no? Because we see ourselves as part of this community working for change.
Benji, those who experienced EDSA 30 years ago say a lot of the present generation, our students, do not understand what we fought for then, the experience of EDSA. How do we keep those lessons alive? Paano natin isa sa buhay, mananatiling buhay ang mga nangyari noon para hindi makalimutan at di na muling mangyari ang mga bagay na pinaglaban natin noong araw?
Alam mo, totoo, no, na pag sinasabi mong generation, meron talagang kaugnayan dun sa karanasan mo ng panahon na yun. So, alam mo, era-defining events, no, define a generation because you experience, no, the event. That's true, for example, for people who experienced the Declaration of Martial Law, 72, or even before, yung Battle of Menjola. Or let's say, for example, yung EDSA nga, 1986. But you can also say the same thing about our parents, no, who went through World War II, the battle for the liberation of Manila. And some say, no, yung never again, no, is also true of the atrocities during that time. So merong ganon, no, era-defining events, define a generation, but also separate them from the past and the present. So yun yung challenge, no, I think. But it doesn't mean that there can always be parang generational gaps that you cannot bridge those. So that's why I think the perspective even of the statement and what we've been saying, why there's a need for commemoration, is that you can actually talk not of generation gaps, but generational dialogue through storytelling. Kasi mahalaga yun eh. Palagi ko maski na yung generation natin na hindi naman dumaan sa World War II, natuto rin dahil sa mga kwento ng mga magulang natin. No? So pwede rin naman ikwento yun. No? Pero kailangan siguro buhay na kwento. No? Yun ang importante, yung buhay na kwento. Meron sinabi si Father Arevalo, no? 30 years ago, no? About the EDSA experience. Sabi niya, yung kwento ay disclosure stories. No? I think that's very significant because what he meant by that was that these are stories of people responding to a call for social involvement and political involvement. Maybe the call really was deep down coming from God, no? Parang a faith-based call. But it was also inspiring others to respond. So kung ganyan ang pananaw mo dun sa story, halimbawa, tumugon ako dahil palagay ko merong tawag sa akin. Tapos dahil sa ginawa ko, merong iba naman na inspired din. Ay, yun ang maganda eh. So if we can have stories like that of people responding, at some point, it's no longer just individual personal disclosure stories, it becomes a community response. So parang community nang tumutugon dito. Palagi ko kung ganun natin makita, yun ang kumbaga, miracle of EDSA. Ang miracle of EDSA, yung lahat, kumbaga, na-inspire, tapos tumugon dahil yung ibang tao tumutugon. Ibig sabihin, halimbawa, Ninoy Aquino assassination. For many people, that was very inspiring because it was not just the killing that was important. What was important was the witnessing. And when people see witnesses like that, they respond. And it's not just Ninoy, no? Others also saw Evelio Javier later on, no? O mismo si Cory Aquino. And maybe even little stories. Maski na yung nakilala nila sa EDSA, halimbawa, nakita lang, bakit sila nandun? Kasi para doon sa mga taong yun, mahalaga yun, hindi lamang para sa kanya, pero sa pamilya niya, para sa mas malawak na komunidad. So when you see also, for example, now, your own teachers responding to this because it's so important to them, that they feel that this is also their calling. So teachers are not just talking to their students, they're talking to a wider community because that community can respond. So I think if we have this kind of storytelling and dialogue, we can have generational collective action, as it were. No? Hindi lamang my generation or your generation. In fact, if we have some kind of common experience, we can work together as different generations for the common good.
You think it's a failure, our failure as a people, that the characters that we despised and we fought against in EDSA are still around? Is it a failure of us as a people? Masyado tayong di ba, mapagpagkatawad, and Imelda Marcos came to Ateneo, and Bongbong is still running for vice president. Di ba dapat wala na lahat yung mga yan?
Well, oo nga, di ba madalas sinasabi na wala tayong kultura ng ostracism, no? Wala tayong ganun eh. Well, strength and weakness 'yon, no? Pero I think it's something that we have to guard against, no? So that's why if you focus on the positive and if you don't focus on the negative, what we can do is look at what are the things that inspired us. Of course, part of also the inspiration might be condemning things that we don't like. But if we focus, for example, on the need for transformation, even if we have achieved something that's very important, maybe it can galvanize us. No?
Last question. We've done probably a small part with the signing of the document. How can our students continue the story to probably the bigger masses of our people, to the next generation? Ano nakikita mong pwedeng gawin ng ating mga estudyante para manatiling buhay ang spirit ng EDSA?
At tingin ko, naman, no? Yung mga estudyante naman natin, namumulat din naman. Palagi ko meron ding pagnanasa na makilahok. No? Minsan nga sinasabi, di ba, merong criticism na apathetic daw yung mga kabataan. Hindi ako naniniwala dun eh. Parang ang mas nakikita ko nga, parang problema pa ng parang hindi sila empowered eh. Yung parang minsan kasi, dati natanong ko na yan sa mga estudyante, totoo ba na hindi kayo nakikisangkot? Pero ang sagot nila, hindi dahil ayaw namin makisangkot, pero tingin namin, kahit kami makisangkot, wala pa rin mangyayari. So palagay ko, ano yun, parang disempowerment yun eh, rather than apathy. So ang kailangan mong ibigay dyan, yung mga pagkakataon na pwede silang merong magawa. No? Di ba, bakit ba successful yung mga, maski Gawad Kalinga o minsan yung mga tutorial programs, no? Meron silang nakikita na pwede nilang magawa. Pero palagay ko, ang hamon, pag-ugnay mo yung mga maliliit mong ginagawa sa mas malaking proyekto. So, halimbawa ngayon, maski na simulan mo sa statement, di ba? Pero darating sa punto, kailangan mo ring pag-usapan, sino ba iboboto mo? Tapos, kung hindi lamang personalities ang kailangan mong pagpilian, kailangan bumuo ka ng organisasyon para yung binoboto mo, meron din programa, halimbawa. So palagi ko pwede yung maliliit na bagay na yun eh. Yung mga successful na na involvement mga estudyante dati, halimbawa yung Sumilaw March dati, nung nagsimula yan, parang kampanya lang yan para bumili ng tsinelas eh, para doon sa mga magsasaka. Pero mula doon, nakilala nila yung magsasaka, no? Tapos talagang nakita nila na kailangan nilang tugunan yung problema, hindi lamang doon sa tsinelas, no? Pero pati yung lupa mismo. Pero pagka tugunan mo na yung problema sa lupa, kasi siyempre, dadating yan sa policy eh, yung agrarian reform.
Agrarian reform. So from there, posibleng magkaroon ng empowerment ng mga estudyante natin.
Oh, pwede. Kasi kung nakikita mo may ginagawa yung maliliit na may mangyayari doon sa maliliit na bagay na ginagawa mo, merong tutunguhan eh, na mas malaking magagawa. So kailangan may iugnay yung maliit na pagtugon sa mas malawak na layunin.